All right, we're going to get started. So welcome everybody. Post-lunch, it's that big sigh, post-lunch. My first panel after lunch. So what we're here to talk about today is building OTT success and really about video engagement and how do we improve that engagement. And the way this panel is going to work is I've got a few intro slides just to kind of set the framework or the groundwork or whatever you want to call it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're just going to kick off right into the discussion. So kind of setting the stage, why is this panel important? Why do we even care about OTT? So one of the things we know is that OTT is growing. A couple of stats and graphs from eMarketer about the growth of OTT and the growth of the subscriber base. So we know that they're going year over year. They're seeing more subscribers. It is lessening over time. The prediction is that less users will be adopting OTT into 2018 and 2019, so we'll see that plateau. But we're still seeing subscriber growth. So this is important that we pay attention to this. This is a graph from Limelight Network's State of the Online Video Survey. It's a presentation I gave yesterday. And what this talks about really is we're seeing a tremendous uptick in the amount of time people are watching online video per week. And what's really interesting is it's not just every demographic, so everyone's watching video. It's really the millennials that are driving this transition from traditional linear television into OTT. So that's what we're really starting to see right now. So again, this is becoming a target market for video engagement. How do we keep millennials engaged so that we continue to drive OTT success? And here's a little bit of data that I just pulled off today that Wistia does. And what they looked at was the percentage of abandonment as a relationship to the length of video. And so this is something just interesting to see in that the longer the video is, the more apt people are to abandon it. So something is happening with long tail content that people are abandoning much earlier on in much larger numbers. Now, one of the things about OTT though, even though we talk about, yeah, it's growing, it's big, we're on this trend, it's going to get bigger, it's going to get this transformation is going to happen someday, we're seeing a lot of churn right now. So people are dropping off of OTT services for lots of different reasons. And one of those reasons, I would argue, and that perhaps we'll talk about on this panel, is that the experience is not broadcast quality. So OTT right now is still not the same thing. Bless you.
Wake up.
It's still not the same thing as watching linear television, right? You sit down, you grab the remote control, and you press the power button, and the TV just comes on with this great content and great picture. That doesn't happen really with OTT, right? We have buffering, we have slow startup times, we have drop packets, we have all sorts of technical issues that take it away from being sort of broadcast quality. And this is kind of the picture that I have in my head when things don't work right with OTT services, right? I mean, I've had this problem when I'm trying to watch something on HBO Go, I'm trying to watch Game of Thrones, and I'm in a bad connection spot, and I'm getting buffering. This is me, just really me. All right, so with that said, what I want to do is I would like to go through and introduce all of our panelists, starting with Brian here. And they're going to give you like a 30-second overview of who they are and what they do and what their company does, and then we'll get into talking about video engagement. So to you, Brian.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Sealander. I'm the Executive Vice President of Whistle Sports, which was birthed from the idea around 2009, 2010, that millennials didn't want to watch guys my age or older in blazers tell them what happened in the sports they just watched. They had less interest than ever in sitting on a couch and watching one screen when there were many, many more screens they could put between themselves and that big screen. And that the idea of here's what happened yesterday was going to become a commodity. So we launched formally January 1st of 2014, and we just celebrated our 185th millionth fan and follower this morning.
I'm Serge Kasarjian. I manage all the media apps globally for Play, for Google, across Android, all the form factors, TV, phone, tablet, cars, watches, virtual reality now. And I think in terms of OTT, our team has done all of the OTT partnerships that Google has done with all the big OTT players.
And you do have the longest title on the slide, which
yeah,
is
I think someone stole it from my LinkedIn profile or something like that.
Is it an acronym?
Yeah, no.
Dan.
I'm Dan Burkhardt. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Recurly. We do recurring billing, subscription billing management, and revenue optimization for about 2,000 companies out there, many of whom are OTT providers, the likes of Sling and CBS All Access, and many, many other vertical providers. Looking to outsource subscription billing operations and optimization.
Thank you. And my name is Mike Lucero. I'm from Seattle. I work for a company called Ratio, where I run product and strategy. We are sort of what I call the last mile. We build the end user experiences, the applications, if you will, that run on the Google and many other platforms. We've actually built one for the Whistle, for the Xbox. We create these end user experiences for brands like Disney, iHeartRadio. We just launched their tvOS app. Red Bull Media House, Fox, sort of a who's who of media companies. And whenever apps launch, the first thing that happens is nobody shows up. And so we try to prevent that from happening and make sure that there's a strong audience development plan as part of that launch process. And there's a bunch of techniques we have that we use, and I will share some of those with you today.
Fantastic. All right, so my first question, let's start sort of at the top level. In the user experience, right? So you have a UX, you go to an app to watch, or you go on a website to watch, you've got a player, you've got a thing that you're interacting with. What can be done at the user experience level to increase video engagement?
Why don't I take that one since that...
That's what you do for a living?
Yeah, that's what I do for a living. Obviously, so there's a number of things that are super important, which begins actually with the experience itself. We believe very strongly that we build applications for all these platforms, like I said, iOS, tvOS, Android, and Fire TV, the Microsoft stack, and Roku. And we think it's very important that the user experience be comfortable for that platform. You want a Roku app to feel like a Roku app, an Apple TV app to feel like an Apple TV app, et cetera. So we actually begin by believing that there should be a very native-like experience that welcomes the user and that they're comfortable navigating and browsing within. The next important thing is obviously the curation, and that's actually where a lot of times there's sort of failure in, and we've found this with recommendations. Getting the right content in front of the person to continue to engage them is super important, and we're trying more and more to make sure that the content is curated and recommended on a sort of a user by user basis, so that what they see actually is something that entices them. Also super important is making that sexy. We just launched an app on Roku for a service called Tribeca Shortlist. It's a Lionsgate Tribeca joint venture. And we actually, there's a new SDK 2.0 for Roku that came out. It's got these really sexy images on it. And the idea behind Shortlist is that it's sort of the opposite of Netflix. They basically have about 400 pieces of content that they rotate in every few weeks. And they are curated by directors and actors and things like that. So we have these big, sexy images that really romance the content. So making sure that people are fired up and excited, you just want to dive into those movies. So that's a super important feature that it's capable now on more and more platforms. So really drawing them in is important. In terms of making sure that they see the right thing, there's actually some pretty cool technology companies. Two specifically are Digital Smiths and Iris TV. And what they actually do, and they enable, we enable this on our sort of incarnations of the platform, is they do enable A/B testing, so you can see what kind of content people are more interested in actually consuming. So being able to use technology, we actually have an advantage over television in the sense that you can really use that data to inform those decisions. I'm sure we're going to talk about that later in the panel as well, because we've got some great data sources there. So using that data smartly, dynamically, and very proactively, both real time and then also in terms of your content, licensing roadmap is super important. And then last but not least is quality of service. If you hit that, I was talking to the folks at Vice a few weeks ago at NAB, and their top priority for their Apple TV app was that you hit play and it starts playing right away. That buffering is unacceptable. We're not going to really bridge that gap until Quas really delivers what it needs to. So quality of service, quality of video experience, even buffering during the video, that's unacceptable, and we have to solve that as an industry over the next few years. So just a couple starting thoughts.
What about you, Serge, specifically? I mean, because you gave a great presentation this morning on sort of the Android, process. What do you think about that in terms of engagement? How does the experience or the user experience really impact that?
Well, I think that's spot on. The native elements are really, really important. At the end of the day, you want to be able to take advantage of all the different APIs, whatever the platform is providing, right? Every single one of the platforms has very, very strong elements to it that actually have been thought about for a very, very long time to figure out, okay, how do we bring content up to the user? How do we make sure that search functionality is integrated? How do we make sure, I know Roku does this great thing with their cards and marketing and merchandising content within it. There are some intrinsic examples of things that platforms do that are very, very advantageous as compared to what linear television can do and what a typical set-top box can do. And quite frankly, the lean-back experience of linear is not broken. People love going through channels, and it works very, very, very well. And when you're thinking about what is the consumer value proposition for an OTT streaming experience, well, it's on demand. It's getting content that you would never be able to get on a linear feed. It's native elements, and it's a much more reactive rather than a proactive approach to watching content in a lot of times. The system notifications, the merchandising in Roku, all this stuff are elements that make a much better consumer experience so that the system knows what you want. And it's a curated, if any one of these platforms has a set of apps on the platform, the user specifically pick those apps. So it's a very, very curated experience to the user. The user is doing the curation. The system needs to provide the content based on that curation that the user is doing.
And I will underscore that in terms of the nativeness of the apps, we have Android developers who love using those features, and that's what these guys specialize. It's like you have iOS developers, you have Android developers, and the animations, the graphics, the sort of the look and feel of those apps is Android is a great example. Even for Fire TV, we've got some of those same elements onto the Amazon box, which was really a nice treat for the developers to actually put that on the big screen. So, absolutely agree with that point about the nativeness.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I'm happy to jump in. I'll provide sort of slightly different context. In a prior life, I ran a team called the Buyer Engagement Team at eBay, and part of my job was to acquire customers from not only Google, but AOL, MSN, and Yahoo as sources of customer acquisition. And what we found was that each of those different cohorts and channels of users had very different characteristics in terms of their preferences for buying on the eBay platform. And of course, their engagement characteristics were very different over time. So studying that data from a merchandising perspective is really not that different. When we talk about curation in the world of streaming media, it's very common for media publishers to test with bundles and go through the classic cross-sell, upsell marketing journey, if you will, in terms of migrating customers across bundles and continually introducing new content to them so that they can increase that share of viewership and engagement over time. And so it's sort of, I would say, applying some of the typical and more traditional merchandising techniques, but now within the context of media consumption is, the same old adages and metrics still apply in terms of how you optimize your business over time.
So I'll just add an anecdote to make this kind of real-life experience. So a couple years ago, we were watching the World Cup because we're a sports network, and when you work for a sports network, you get to watch the World Cup and call it work. And instead of watching it on TV, though, we actually watched it on Xbox because not only were you able to follow in exactly the same quality as you would have otherwise, but when somebody would get the ball, there would actually be a situation where you would see the player who had it and some of their stats. Or there'd be this running commentary on the sides of the screen. And it was a difference between passive consumption and active engagement with the sport. And we were all, I have the attention span of an 11-year-old, but most of us sort of young millennial 20-somethings in the office. And everybody's really leaned in and really engaging and really enjoying all the other experience. The problem was, a lot of other companies on our floor were also watching the game. And they were watching it on traditional TV, which meant they had maybe a 4 or 5 second head start. So we'd hear, "Ah, no, ah!" And we're like, "Oh God, somebody's gonna scan," and there it is. Okay, and so that lasted sort of 2 games, and then we just didn't want to be tipped off 5 seconds in that the goal was gonna happen. And that is still one of the problems with sort of OTT versus traditional TV if you're interested in the kind of lean back experience.
So Dan, you brought up an interesting point, and it's kind of based on this, but it's really sort of the role of data in understanding video engagement, right? What kind of data does an OTT provider need to collect, and what can they do with that data to really drive better engagement with their content?
Sure, happy to take that. So I would say the most successful publishers out there have quite sophisticated insights that they keep an eye on daily, frankly. And it relates to, when you think about bundles and curation, there is a need to understand the intersection between not only price points and plans or bundles that are being offered, but also what happens over time with those bundles that are being offered in terms of, it can be cross-sell, upsell, migration path, as I mentioned. It can be churn events. It can be sort of customer decisions that are being made around either intentional or unintentional churn. So there's credit card driven churn as well, where your credit card fails. We've heard about the Netflix announcement that the EMV chip and pin replacement impacted their customer churn. So there can be unintentional churn, there can be intentional churn where a customer deliberately comes in and says, unsubscribe me, I want out. That intersection between all of the various price points and content offerings, the ongoing customer activity and the continuity of that relationship over time, and those billing events and the kinds of different events that the cross-sell, upsell migration path for SVOD offerings is really critical to watch. I'll back way up to my prior life where we would acquire customers from AOL. I mentioned they tended to be 10 years older on average, just from a demographic profile perspective. So they had very different consumption patterns on eBay than customers we would acquire, say, from Yahoo or Google. And those different characteristics of different customer demographic profiles certainly have strong bearing on the kinds of content that they're going to be interested in consuming and the kinds of content that they're going to be engaged with over time. And so understanding in sort of a test, learn, and iterate fashion where you can align your curated content catalog best with the channels of customers that are most likely to be engaged with that content is not something that companies or publishers tend to get right out of the gates. They have to test, learn, and iterate and find that bullseye target of that nice alignment between the audience and the content offering.
Yeah, I think the number one thing around data and collecting data is being able to analyze churn. The biggest issue with OTT providers right now is people go in and they binge a whole bunch of content and then they churn out immediately. So there's a lot of questions on, okay, how do we stop that? And there are a lot of ways to do it, right? There are ways, you're looking at someone like a Hulu right now who's introducing like bundles with Showtime and a Hulu bundle and now the linear bundle that they're including, right? Providing new services. But the data needs to let you know who are your customers that are going to be churning out most frequently. How do you retarget them even after they've churned out? How do you target them before they're churned out to make something compelling so that when they finish a season of a specific TV show, you know that they finished that season despite it being at any time within the calendar year, so that you can retarget them and keep them on your platform in some kind of way. I think that's the biggest issue right now, especially with a lot of the big networks that are going from a model that has traditionally been part of the bundle to a new direct-to-consumer model. How are they figuring out this process of churn and how, because they don't have data around it right now, right? They don't, like you go and talk to any of these guys, CBS, whoever, you ask them, oh, what did you do with churn a year ago? And they're just going to throw their hands up and say, well, I have no idea because they never had to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be in the near term, in the next couple of years, understanding those churn rates and how to keep people on the platform is going to be the most important thing.
And averages lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and forms of payment are different.
That's
Different, all these guys have credit cards on file. Different credit cards have different expiration dates. Some are through direct carrier billing, some are through PayPal, some are through all these different places. And each one of those guys are different, right? And each one has a different lifetime value. And every single one of these providers should know that lifetime value of a specific type of form of payment so they can manage their churn the right way.
What did you mean averages lie?
So the question was, what did I mean by averages lie? And what I meant specifically was, I can give you an example. So free trial subscribers are very different than subscribers that would come with purchase intent, meaning they have their credit card in hand, they're willing to sign up out of the gates. They tend to have very different churn characteristics and very different lifetime value over time. And so if you're looking at all of your different marketing promotions and all of your different channel partners in one big bucket and just looking at your average lifetime value, you're likely to miss the point. You have to sort of decompose that and deconstruct it and start to parse the data in ways that allow you to compartmentalize, okay, what was the price point? Did this customer come in through a free trial or not? Were they paying out of the gates? And once you can start to segment your audience in that kind of a way, you can get a much clearer understanding for where you can start pruning your underperforming channels and programs so that you can double down on your overperforming or higher yield channels and programs. It's a continual lather, rinse, repeat effort.
And an HBO subscriber on April 20th is very, very different than an HBO subscriber on June 20th because of the cycle of the content, right? Right before Game of Thrones comes out is very, very different when right before Game of Thrones is ending. So those averages are not going to be the same based on the people that you acquire.
Good example.
So that leads me to a different question, actually, because one of the things we know about OTT is that people are going to service providers for content, right? It's I'm going to Amazon for this show, I'm going to HBO for this show, I'm going to CBS will be for Star Trek in 2017. So I'm going for these specific shows. What is the impact of content availability and discoverability on video engagement? Does having the right content, is that enough to get people to engage with the video for a long period of time, or is there something more to it?
I've got a couple thoughts on that, which is that, first of all, obviously the content is that's obviously why people are coming, but using that content in a way to really drive audience can be very, there are a lot of techniques you can use to really take advantage of that, and how you do that on a platform by platform basis is super important. There's a couple of really important things, and there's actually one example. It's not the perfect example, but it makes an important point about how there's a meta point, which is in the entertainment world. There's sort of a rule of thumb that 50% of a budget should go into production and 50% should go into marketing. So just because you build it, just because it exists, doesn't mean you suddenly have it arrive and it's going to be populated with a great audience. Actually, with the work we did for the Whistle on Xbox 360, when we launched it, it kind of launched and nobody showed up because there was no marketing around it. And what we ended up doing was we put together a marketing campaign with a brand, Subaru, that we sold with the Whistle. This was when I was previously at Xbox, and this was in that previous life when this app launched. And what we did was basically we got Subaru to underwrite the promotion for the app itself, around some content featuring Brody, the Ultimate Frisbee guy.
Brody Smith.
Brody Smith, yeah. So it was essentially a branded content play. So the content was the driver, but using that to promote it smartly on that platform is super important. They got like $500,000 worth of impressions courtesy of Subaru, which is a great way to get free promotion. Now that said, you should not be afraid. The Tribeca Shortlist app I was talking about, they're actually paying Roku to promote that app. So you don't be afraid to actually pay for advertising, because that's how it's going to be discovered. The pane in the Roku navigation, that's a prime piece of real estate, and having that a percentage of the time to a targeted audience is going to be super valuable to your engagement, and that can be both around the app, but also more importantly about content. If you're doing Game of Thrones,
so us and Apple won't do that. So
Right.
we don't let. So the merchandising, right? Like every app developer wants to be featured in the Play Store or the iOS store, and so ultimately our team decides who gets featured, and we won't do it based on dollars that people are giving us. It's just against kind of the ethos of an open ecosystem. The way we make those featuring and merchandising decisions are purely based on event-driven and product-driven decisions. So if an app is built very, very well, it's a beautiful design, beautiful integration, then it's the best experience that we want to put in front of our users, as well as if the app has relevant content at a specific time. So the NFL is a big partner for ours. If the Super Bowl is going on and the NFL app looks beautiful and is built very, very well, we will run a lot of merchandising and promotion for the NFL. The NFL has not paid a penny for that. We've done that all through a partnership of their product integration and their marketing team around big tentpole events. And we do that consistently. I can't speak for the other big platform, but my guess is they probably do the exact same thing.
I would agree with the other platform you're talking about. In terms of the Xbox specifically, there was some windowing that can be done where, if you're we did this with Hulu, Crackle, all the big guys. If there's a piece of content that they would provide an exclusive on for a period of time, usually just a week or two, then that was something that the promotions team could get excited about and feature. So it's essentially a pitch you have to make, but a well thought out pitch to basically tell the story that you just told.
And ultimately what it does is we're going to constantly be introducing new products, right? 2 years ago there was no Android TV, there was no Wear, no Auto. 4 years ago we didn't really have much of a tablet presence. And one of the incentives that we have for people to build great experiences across these new devices is to have them support product build and build good products. And ultimately, that's the most important thing for our users, right? We want to make sure that the users are getting the best possible products out there, and that's worth more than any co-marketing dollars or any spend that they do with us. I will say one thing: we have been running some ads to drive app downloads on within Play Search, and now you'll see within Search, within the Play Store, you'll see an install action for an app where it's entirely experimental. So I think just because of our DNA in search, we've included some of that within our search, but it's not on the main merchandising page.
That's always the slightly frustrating part of a panel like this, if you're in the audience, is the walkaway is, okay, boss, I went to this great panel in New York City, and here's the takeaway. If I just make really amazing content with a really incredible user experience, it'll succeed with some marketing dollars that I need you to give me. So there you go. You're welcome. I will say with Brody Smith, though, for young millennials, so our target demographic is 14 to sort of 30. That I think social in some ways goes over the top of over the top. That when you think about that sort of sit-back experience, and when you use the Hulus or people like that, they're still a big screen first experience. But I actually started as a journalist now 20-something years ago. And if you were a news consumer back then, I would think of these, it's fitting because it's streaming, I'll use a water metaphor because why not? You'd sort of go to these ponds that would be the Wall Street Journal or a Gannett paper or even NBC, and you would sort of put your reel in and then you'd fish out a story about it. And that was how you consumed your media. You sort of go someplace and like, this is my kind of pond and this is what the name of it is, I'm going to pull something out. The rise of the Facebook stream and Twitter and my Snapchat feed and all of these other places, I'm no longer going pond to pond. I'm kind of standing in the middle of this rushing stream of information. And everything is coming at me from all of these sources, all pouring into the same place. And it's now up to me as the consumer to be kind of brand agnostic and just grab the shiniest, most engaging thing that's going past me. And if I am under 30, I am still watching a lot of TV, but I've probably got another screen in front of me. A majority of the time you do. And you're fighting for primacy of attention between the screen that's directly in front of you and the screen that's behind it. And so leveraging people that inherently know a lot about social. There's a reason why when we launched the Xbox app, we picked Brody Smith, who happens to have a social media following of like 11 million. When Brody does something, people think of him more as a friend than they do as a celebrity. And if you do testing on this, Variety said that of the top 20 celebrities in terms of brand awareness, purchase intent, and trust, that I think 14 of the 20 were all YouTubers for people under 30. So it's no longer like, this is my network and I'm telling you what to do. This is a friend that's telling me they're doing something really interesting in their lives that I get to be part of. And my friend is telling me that they've also got a new show on this platform, this platform, this platform. And so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt to step out of the stream where I'm spending most of my time, because most time spent on phones is in these sort of 5 or 6 major apps, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to follow them out of that stream over to this new app. And so that's the upside of kind of partnering with people that have an existing following on, I would call it sort of OTTS, sort of over-the-top social.
So, so that leads to a question for the panel then, is what's the role of social in video engagement? How important is it to have your content linked to all the social networks so that you get what Brian just talked about, this kind of exponential N effect of people talking about what you're watching?
Well, social is video now. So when we launched January of 2014, we were the YouTube Sports Network, is what the shorthand, Wall Street Journal or somebody called us that. But by the fall of 2014, Facebook decided it wanted to be a video platform. And it went on all in on its algorithms to become a video platform. And now Instagram is very much a short form video package. And Snapchat is very much a video package that lets your friends forget what you did last night, which is helpful if you're in our millennial audience, that that video only lasts for 20 hours, 24 hours. But these are all video platforms now.
Any other thoughts? What about for an OTT provider? What can an OTT provider do with social in order to enhance video engagement? Because that's correct. All these social networks are becoming video platforms. But with OTT content that's behind a paywall or a subscription wall or something else, how do you leverage social to get more engagement with the content?
I think it's still at this point, it drives awareness, right? It drives an opportunity for tentpole events and everything to basically explain what content is out there. I think there will always be long-form content that won't be appropriate for social. Even to this point, YouTube somewhat has struggled with that, right? Having longer TV shows hasn't been the bread and butter because of YouTube's intrinsic social roots when it comes down to it. I think right now it's interesting if you look at the various social platforms. A lot of social is around storytelling and narratives and breaking news. It hasn't been more around consuming long form content, right? No one's saying, oh, I'm going to go watch a movie on a social platform, right? But I'm going to find out what is happening on a social platform. And that's why you haven't seen many OTT devices have social platforms. Like Facebook hasn't really built many apps for any of the OTT devices, neither Snapchat. Twitter's tried a little bit and it hasn't really worked out. And I think that's exactly it, right? When people sit down and they put themselves in front of an OTT device, they're ready to consume long-form content. And that long-form content isn't really on any of the social platforms. It's snack size, quick to consume. It takes up a there isn't really quite a threat yet there for the Netflix of the world or the Hulus of the world. Will there be? Maybe, but right now there isn't.
Yeah, that's one thing, and frankly, we talked about this actually before the panel, that the 10-foot social experience is not yet a very good experience. It's like you don't watch something and then share. You can, there's an ability to do it, and it's easy to do on Xbox, but actually getting people to do that without an incentive doesn't happen very often. So in terms of social, I think the 10-foot experience still needs to be solved. And Xbox also had a Facebook app that I don't think ever performed very well either. So I think in general, that's a problem that still needs. Everyone says TV is social, but it's really more through a companion experience called Facebook versus anything that's integrated into an experience. And frankly, all the attempts at integration have been pretty much a failure.
So,
but I will.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I want to make one more point. In terms of how long-form content owners have actually been very successful is the CW does a great job of using their talent as the social keepers and promoters of their brand. So their entire cast of shows are on all their social media. I don't think it's in their contracts, but it may be. But they are very actively involved, and that gets them very close to the influencers in their audiences that then drive the rest of the audiences to be enthusiastic about the show. So it's very, it's very sort of ham-fisted, but it actually works in the case of CW very well, particularly with that millennial audience.
So I think one thing that's important to note is Facebook at this point, and this is just me being an observer of Facebook, they've made a very, very, very heavy bet into virtual reality right now. Mm-hmm. And when you think about virtual reality is the longest form of content at some point, right? You're going to have to put a headset on your head and sit there and watch and not interact with anyone, right? So intrinsically, it seems like it's the least social of content, right? You're doing it all by yourself. But I think part of the reason why they're investing so heavily in virtual reality platforms is they need to get longer content. They need to get people more engaged with devices and spend more time rather than just go in and check in on something. And eventually, long-form content will be social, but it just hasn't gotten there, and they want to link that together. So I think that's a very, very, the push they're making into that shows what they don't have yet and what they're hoping to get.
So actually, that leads me to another question, really interesting. So you made a good point about, hey, this is the takeaway for the panel, right? And we're talking about
great stuff.
Yes,
Yep.
We're talking about content and increasing engagement. Is there a way to predict engagement? So is there a way an OTT provider can look at what's happening with their subscribers and figure out what content should I make available, what content should I create, what content should I license in order to drive better engagement with the platform as a whole?
I think it's what Netflix does already, right? They actually fund their shows based on what they predict will be the engagement based on A/B tests they've done with other shows. So they'll look at a show and they'll say, okay, it's got these 10 ingredients. These have the highest levels of engagement and are the ones that drive the most subscribers. So they actually make production decisions or make funding decisions of original content based on all the data they've seen based on other shows. So I think it's pretty well documented. It's out there if you search for things like that.
So how can other OTT providers replicate what Netflix is doing?
They're all trying to, right? Yeah. They're all hiring audience development people and A/B testing people and trying to do the same thing.
You need data scientists.
Yeah.
It's all about algorithms and AI and machine learning, all that kind of stuff. It's all out there. It's just a matter of, some of the companies that have enough resources have really been able to build that muscle. It's not something that a smaller guy can necessarily do, but there's lots of people out there that are, have that ability.
Those cross-sell, upsell opportunities that typically occur when testing of bundles is happening start to emerge like a roadmap or sort of trails in a field. So an example that I have seen is a Hindi news station, of course, bundled with a cricket channel was quite successful. It's not a leap of logic, but those kinds of different bundling opportunities exist, and it's sort of like past is prologue. Once you start to see those patterns emerge, you can start to be more accurate and effective in the way that you predict the next step beyond that, in terms of the next step of the next offer that you should put in front of that kind of customer.
And brands come to us with hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in campaigns for project launches and brand integration. And we, in addition to having done several hundred thousand individual interviews with people in our demographic, we also have the real-time feedback of 750 million pieces a month of interaction that we have. So by the time a brand comes, we've been able to check brand affinity across various subsections of the demographic, creators or types of content that work well with various other pieces of that demographic. And we can say, you know what, sneaker company, I know you think you want to do X, and I know that you've got the budget to do X, but I'm going to tell you, we want this to outperform, and so don't do X. The data says that the overlay of brand affinity, purchase intent, creator recognition and engagement, and the types of things you want to build would be much better invested doing something else. And that's a weird conversation to have with a brand. Please don't spend that money right now. Let us come back with something.
But that's fantastic. I mean, that's really what the success of OTT really needs, and the success of online video really needs, is this bi-directional relationship between the content creators, the content owners, the content licensors, and the platforms that they're using, so that they know what should I be showing and when should I be showing it. So that leads me. So obviously, OTT is about subscribers, right? OTT platforms want to make money. Okay, I got it. So is there a relationship between subscriber loyalty and engagement? Do people who are more loyal as subscribers, so I'm a fanatic Netflix user, do they consume more content and engage with more content more frequently because they're loyal as a subscriber? Or is there no relationship whatsoever? So I'm just kind of curious to get your opinions on that.
I can speak to that, absolutely. So there is very much a relationship between loyalty and engagement. I think of myself as a longtime Netflix subscriber, I don't know, probably 6 years now. I haven't even thought twice about the $15 charge that gets buried on my credit card statement every month. And I think that sort of value proposition for me is such that the value that I perceive to be receiving on a monthly basis so far surpasses that $15 charge that comes in that I remain active and engaged. And I'd say that the flip side of that is when you think about lifecycle marketing and renewal marketing, if you have an offering where you have lapsed subscribers that are still active subscribers, but they haven't logged in, they haven't consumed content, they haven't made their way through a full video in some time, those are the customers that are most likely to churn. And so one of the exercises that we always recommend is when engaging in lifecycle or renewal marketing, if you're going to offer a renewal promotional offers, 20% discount to re-up, we always say the first step you should do is go through and eliminate all of your most engaged subscribers, because you don't necessarily want to put that offer in front of your most engaged, most active subscribers. They're probably the least likely to need a 20% off coupon. You want to put it in front of those subscribers that have lapsed or waned in their usage and their engagement is declining, so that you can get them back on the program and alter that value proposition, that value exchange that I described, where the value you perceive to be consuming far surpasses the expense on a monthly basis.
Anybody else with any thoughts on that one? No? All right, we're just about out of time, so I do have one last question to ask you, and it's a little bit of a controversial question. In your opinion, who do you think is going to win the OTT race? Is it just Netflix? Is it Netflix is going to dominate the market forever, or will up-and-comings eat Netflix's lunch over time? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, at a high level, and you probably already have sort of prescient view into the data, but I think there's going to be a surge of these skinny bundles and small offerings, and our own business reflects this. You know, at the beginning of the year, practically every app we were building was an SVOD app, and there's going to be a point where there's saturation. There's going to be too many offers, and they're going to start. If you look at the Vessel is a great example. It should be doing incredibly well, but all indicators are that it's not. So there's going to be this surge of supply, and just like the cable model oversaturated people with content, they're going to have the same issue, and they're going to start winnowing down. And then there will start probably being more of the phenomena that Amazon has enabled with their very sort of easy curation of your own, basically creating your own skinny bundle that just makes that even easier. And that'll kind of land us in a new balanced, a new equilibrium, if you will, where Netflix is a big player, Hulu is a big player, and there'll be a bunch of smaller players, but not as many as there are going to be existing in the next 12 to 18 months, is my prediction. There's going to be starting in 12 to 18 months, some of these newer offerings are going to start failing and getting either merging with others or getting just eliminated completely.
I think that's great. I think that I can comment from perhaps a different perspective and vantage point, which is that we engage with a lot of different publishers and media providers, and I would say that there are differences culturally in the way that these various companies build their operations. And I would say, and I'm going to offer a kind of a safe, abstract answer, which is that I think that the companies that will be most successful are going to be the companies that are super data-driven and have a voracious appetite to continually seek the truth and continually iterate and A/B test their way to an ever-changing landscape of alignment between audience and content offerings. And I would say that those companies, and frankly, Netflix is one of them. They are not a customer of ours, but they, of course, have a big data operations on top of their billing operations, all very sophisticated. So I'd say that they have a tremendous head start, but they also have a very voracious appetite for data and continually seeking the truth. And for me, I would just say that it is that clock speed of iteration, and it's the speed with which you can continually get incrementally better at making that alignment work, and increasing lifetime value of customer is probably one of the most critical variables.
Yeah, so I think there's like, when we look back at like 5 years from now, it's probably a good indicator of where we'll be. There'll probably be like 5 to 10 more expensive bundles in the $8 to $15 range, and then even potentially some of the existing cable networks who are already launching a little bit more expensive than that. And then you're going to see a whole bunch of small guys at like $2 or $3 or $4. And those will move out very quickly. Some will be there for a while, some will stay, some will go, some will come, some will go, some will come. And that market will constantly be fluid. And then you'll have a core market of maybe 10 of like $7.99 and up, or maybe 20, $7.99 and up, which will always be there. And the barrier to become one of the smaller ones and fall out and move in will be very, very low. Much higher barrier to go in and out of the larger ones, just because I think pricing is going to play a really, really important role in this market as people start understanding unbundling. Like right now, you go to get a whole cable bundle and you just pay what you pay, right? People are going to start calibrating on how much they're paying for each of the different services, and that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's going to happen in the next couple of years, and that's going to actually be the point where a lot of them are going to drop out or going to end up staying.
So if this was a Silicon Valley conference, I'd try and say something profound like, the real winner is going to be the viewer, or something like that. But it's not. It's New York, so it'll be more practical. I think there's places for multiple price points. So I know that I subscribe to sort of 2 cable companies, and I know that Game of Thrones plus Silicon Valley plus Veep is totally worth that per month for me. I easily get that much enjoyment out of that cost. I know that my kids love a bunch of shows on Kindle, and my wife loves some shows on Amazon Prime as well. Totally worth paying for, given what you want. And I was actually a cord cutter for a while, and after we sold our last company, I became the chief to a governor for a while, because why not? And he called me, he's like, Brian, how did I do on CNBC this morning? And I said, I don't know. The Romanian internet site that I'd been using the last 2 times you were on to watch CNBC Live got shut down appropriately, and so I didn't know how it went. And he goes, well, what if I totally screwed it up? I'm like, well, then I know that CNBC would have put it up online for me to watch. So I'm assuming it went okay. He's like, Brian, you're the only person in your job in the world that has cut the cord. Get cable again, goddammit. So I did, and you know what? I found that having reattached my cord, I get enough enjoyment out of that too. But I think there's a certain number of dollars that people are willing to spend, and they're willing to sort of live up to that price point to build a basket of experiences that entertain them enough.
Yeah, and I will also add one other point. Don't rule out AVOD. I mean, AVOD is a huge business, and if you look at just the new fronts going on this year, a lot of that is for ad-funded content.
I think Verizon Go 90 actually does some really good stuff. They have some great content, and it's totally free.
Yeah, totally
and even though it's a Verizon product, it's available on every phone. And you don't even need to pay for it. It's brand new shows, engaging, driven by social.
Yeah, there's lots of great free stuff. So in lots of cases, you don't have to make a choice. So and that's going to continue to grow. So I mean, there's not enough. If you talk to anyone who has a first-party ad inventory or a first-party ad sales team, there's not enough inventory out there right now. There's a scarcity of inventory. So CPMs are high, which can fund that content. So there'll be plenty of that, regardless, whether no choice needs to be made for that. Just creating good content and beautiful apps.
If anybody needs content, I'm here afterwards.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Does anybody have any questions?
We kind of bounce back and forth between the notion of sort of OTT's moved to more of a behavioral model, right? Cohort-driven, data-driven, versus TV traditionally used to be heavy kind of demographic, sort of in advance. I'm trying to target a certain socio-demographic. Whistle certainly straddles both, right? But I'd be interested in general if you feel like we're moving more towards, it's all about behavior and cohort, and the underlying demographics in a sense don't matter because the data tells the truth, or is TV still about some audience that we're chasing?
You've got about 2 minutes to answer that question.
Boy, I can take a stab. Cohort-driven analysis is, we have a lot of structured data today that back in the days, I worked at NBC Internet in a prior life, and Nielsen and any other kind of Arbitron ratings to target demographics was always based on samples. Today, we have actual structured data and a tremendous amount of data that comes along with users and subscribers that sign up. And so that information, I think, and that whole science around it has become far more exacting. And so it allows you to capture some of the corner cases that might be counterintuitive, where an older demographic might actually be watching base jumping videos.
Actually, we are out of time, so if we could give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much, guys, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your show.